The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the low-frequency buzz of 1,000 species breathing, clicking, and existing in their own peculiar ways. I adjusted my ocular membranes, trying to focus on the human standing in the center of the assembly floor. My name is Vorthen, and I have served as the Council's chief military analyst for 300 cycles. I have witnessed the collapse of empires, the birth of new civilizations, and more wars than I care to count. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I was about to witness. The human female stood there, casual as a moonrise, holding what appeared to be a primitive iron blade. Her name was Webb, according to the data scroll flickering on my wrist display. 28 standard years old. Former archaeologist. Current designation, unknown. And that unknown part was precisely why we had summoned her. Let me get this straight. Ambassador Quillix of the Tharn Collective wheezed through his respiratory slits, his 3 eyes blinking in sequential disbelief. You are telling this esteemed council that you cut through a Vex battle cruiser with a sword? Kira smiled. Not the polite diplomatic smile we usually saw from human representatives. No, this was the smile of someone who knew a joke that nobody else had figured out yet. Terrifying, really. Not just any sword, she said, tapping the blade against her boot. The metallic ring echoed through the chamber in a way that made my spine ridge tingle. This is the blade of forgotten mathematics. Well, that is what the inscription calls it. I found it in a dig site on Europa about 6 months ago. We thought it was just some ceremonial piece from the pre-expansion era. My supervisor wanted to ship it straight to the Solar History Museum. And you decided to steal it instead? Counselor Marin, a crystalline being from the outer fragments, asked with what might have been disgust. Hard to tell with her species. Borrow, Kira corrected, her green eyes glinting with mischief. I borrowed it. There is a difference. Besides, after I realized what it could do, I figured the museum could wait. I pulled up the incident reports on my display. 3 weeks ago, a Vex raiding party had attacked a human mining colony on Titan's 3rd moon. Standard piracy operation. The Vex were notorious for this kind of activity. They would swoop in, grab whatever valuable resources they could carry, and vanish before any proper defense could mobilize. Brutal, efficient, utterly predictable. Except this time, something had gone very, very wrong. For the Vex, anyway. According to the reports, Kira had been visiting the colony to authenticate some artifacts when the attack began. The Vex battle cruiser, a mammoth vessel called the Scourge of Stars, had descended through the atmosphere like a metal fist. Their boarding parties had already breached the colony's outer defenses when Kira apparently decided she had seen enough. What happened next was, and I am, using the technical term here, completely insane. Perhaps you could explain, I interjected, my translator rendering my clicks and whistles into standard galactic common, exactly how a primitive melee weapon managed to penetrate military-grade armor plating. Kira hefted the sword, and I noticed something odd about the way light bent around it. Not much, just a slight warping, like heat shimmer on a desert world. You know what I love about ancient human civilizations? She asked, clearly enjoying herself. They did not always write things down in ways we could understand. Sometimes they encoded knowledge in objects, in art, in structures. This sword? It has mathematical equations etched along the blade. Not decorative. Functional. She ran her finger along the flat of the blade, and I could see now that what appeared to be ornamental designs were actually dense clusters of symbols and numbers. Took me 2 months to crack the code, she continued. Turns out, some genius from the 23rd century figured out how to encode quantum manipulation formulas into metal. Not just write them down, actually encode them so the metal itself becomes a quantum manipulation device. The chamber erupted in multiple languages expressing various forms of disbelief. I felt my own skepticism rising like bile. Quantum manipulation. That was barely theoretical even now. And this human was claiming some ancient craftsperson had achieved it? Demonstration, demanded High Chancellor Vextor, his mandibles clicking with irritation. Yes, the irony of his name matching the species that had been attacked was not lost on anyone. Prove this claim, or face charges of fraud and fabrication. Kira's smile widened. Happy to oblige. She drew the sword in one fluid motion and held it horizontally before her. Then she did something with her grip, a twist of the wrist, a subtle change in how her fingers wrapped the handle. The temperature in the chamber dropped by at least 10 degrees. I felt it through my thermal regulating suit. The air around the blade began to shimmer more intensely. Then, and I saw this with my own eyes, the sword simply stopped being entirely solid. The blade flickered between states of matter, solid and not solid, there and not there, in a rhythm that made my head hurt to watch. The equations basically tell reality to calm down about where the atoms are supposed to be, Kira explained, as if this were the most normal thing in the universe. The blade exists in a superposition state. It is simultaneously sharp enough to cut through molecular bonds and phased enough to pass through conventional matter. When I swing it at something, it is not really cutting in the traditional sense. It is more like convincing the target's atomic structure that it would really prefer to be somewhere else. She turned to a nearby support pillar, one of the massive durasteel columns that held up the chamber's vaulted ceiling. Without warning, she swung the blade in, a casual arc. The sword passed through the pillar like it wasn't there. No resistance, no sound, just a clean, impossible cut. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding screech that made half the assembly cover their auditory organs, the top half of the pillar began to slide sideways. Emergency gravity stabilizers kicked in immediately, preventing a catastrophic structural collapse. Repair drones swarmed the damaged column like angry insects, and Kira just stood there, looking pleased with herself, while pandemonium erupted around her. "Ancestors preserve us," I muttered, my translator probably failing to capture the full weight of my horror. She just casually vandalized the council chamber. "To be fair," Kira said, clearly hearing me despite the chaos, "you did ask for a demonstration." It took a solid 10 minutes for order to be restored. High Chancellor Vextor looked like he wanted to have Kira ejected out of an airlock, but I could see the calculations running behind his compound eyes. This weapon changed everything. Everything. "Explain the Vex incident," he ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "In detail." Kira sheathed the sword and her expression shifted. The playfulness drained away, replaced by something colder, professional. "The Scourge of Stars came in hot," she began. "Standard Vex tactics. They breached the colony's eastern habitat dome and started rounding up workers. I was in the artifact storage facility when I heard the alarms. I grabbed the sword because, honestly, what else was I going to grab? A mining drill?" She paused, and I noticed her jaw tighten slightly. A muscle memory of fear, perhaps, or anger. I got to the main plaza and saw them herding civilians toward their transport pods. There were about 20 Vex soldiers, all armed with plasma rifles and shock batons. "I am not a soldier," I am an archaeologist who does kickboxing twice a week at the gym. But I had this sword, and I had been studying those equations for weeks, and I thought, why not? Why not? Quillix repeated flatly. You saw 20 armed raiders and thought, why not? Humans, Counselor Marin sighed, and that seemed to be her entire commentary on the situation. The first one did not even see me coming, Kira continued. I activated the sword's quantum state and just walked up and swung. His armor might as well have been tissue paper. The blade passed through his torso, and for a second nothing happened. Then his body just sort of came apart. Not messily, just cleanly separated along the cut line. Medical scans later showed that the quantum disruption had essentially convinced his cells to stop being connected. I pulled up the autopsy reports. She was not exaggerating. The Vex soldier's body had been divided with such precision that each half had momentarily continued functioning independently. It was grotesque and fascinating in equal measure. The others noticed me then, Kira said. They opened fire, plasma bolts, shock rounds, the works. But here is the thing about a sword that exists in quantum superposition. It does not just cut through matter. It cuts through energy, too. I could deflect their shots by phasing the blade into the right frequency. The plasma just slid off, redirected into the air. The tactical part of my brain was screaming. This was impossible. You could not just deflect energy weapons with a sword. That was not how physics worked. Except, apparently, when you had a sword that told physics to take a vacation. I took down 6 more in the plaza, Kira said, her voice steady and clinical now. The rest fell back to their ship. I followed them. Probably stupid, but I was running on adrenaline and spite at that point. They sealed the airlock behind them, thought they were safe. I cut through the door. Then through their interior bulkheads. Then through their weapon systems, their shield generators, and finally their main power core. You cut through a power core, I said slowly. A matter-antimatter reactor. Yep. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? Oh, absolutely. I nearly killed myself about 4 times. But the sword's quantum state actually protected me from the worst of the radiation and energy discharge. It phased me slightly out of sync with the explosion. I felt it. Do not get me wrong. My hair was singed and I think I bruised a rib. But I survived. She said it so matter-of-factly, as if surviving a reactor breach was just a minor inconvenience, as if rewriting the fundamental laws of physics with a glorified kitchen knife was just another Tuesday. The scourge of stars had been found drifting 3 hours later, its hull sliced into sections like a child's puzzle box. Of the 200 Vex crew, 17 had survived by hiding in sealed emergency pods. They had been recovered babbling about a demon with a glowing blade who moved through walls and could not be killed. The Vex High Command has filed an official complaint, High Chancellor Vex Tor said, his voice dripping with the kind of diplomatic poison that started wars. They claim you violated the civilized warfare accords by using a quantum-based weapon in combat. Kira laughed. Actually laughed. The civilized warfare accords? They raided a civilian colony. They were loading unarmed miners into cages. But sure, I am the one who violated the accords by defending them with a fancy sword. Makes perfect sense. The nature of the weapon is the issue, Vextor insisted. Quantum manipulation devices are classified as planet killers under Council law. Their use is strictly forbidden. It is a sword, Kira said flatly. A sword I found in a hole in the ground. Am I supposed to apologize because my ancestors were really good at math? The debate raged for another hour. Various council members weighed in, some demanding the sword be confiscated and destroyed, others arguing that it represented human cultural heritage and could not be seized. Legal precedents were cited. Threats were made, both subtle and overt. Through it all, Kira stood there, one hand resting casually on the sword's pommel, looking for all the world like she was waiting for a bus. I studied her during the arguments, really studied her. There was something in her posture, a readiness that spoke of more than just her recent combat experience. She had been an archaeologist, true, but I was starting to suspect that humanities archaeologists were not quite like other species scholars. They seemed to have a concerning tendency to end up in situations requiring improvised violence. Finally, High Chancellor Vextor called for order. "The Council will deliberate on this matter," he announced. "Kira Webb, you are to surrender the weapon to Council custody pending our decision." "No," Kira said simply. The chamber went silent. You could have heard a photon drop. "I beg your pardon." Vextor's mandibles twitched in what I had learned was extreme agitation. "I said no. This sword is human property, found on human territory, and it stays with me. You want it? Come and take it." Her hand tightened on the sword's grip. The temperature dropped again, and I saw something in her eyes that made my survival instincts scream. This was not just defiance. This was a human backed into a corner, and I had read enough history to know what happened when you cornered a human. "You would threaten this council?" Vextor demanded. "I am defending my right to my own property," Kira corrected. "If that is a threat, maybe you should reconsider your legal framework." 300 cycles of experience told me this situation was about to explode. I activated my personal shield generator quietly, just in case. Around the chamber, I noticed other council members doing the same. We all had the same thought. If this human decided to start swinging that sword, our vaunted security would last approximately 30 seconds. But then something unexpected happened. Ambassador Quillix, of all beings, started laughing. That wet, burbling laugh of the Tharn that sounded like someone drowning in syrup. "Oh, this is magnificent," he wheezed. "Absolutely magnificent. We have spent 10,000 years building laws and protocols and procedures, and this human just walks in here with a magical sword and tells us to shove our regulations where our light receptors do not shine. I love it. I completely love it." "This is not a laughing matter," Vextor snapped. "Oh, but it is," Quillix countered, still chuckling. "Because she is right. We have no legal authority to confiscate her property. The sword was found in human space, on a human moon, by a human citizen. Our jurisdiction ends where their sovereignty begins. If we try to take it by force, we are the ones violating the accords." Vextor looked like he had swallowed something toxic. "Then what do you propose?" Quillix turned his 3 eyes on Kira. "I propose we hire her. The Council needs someone who can handle unusual situations. Pirates, insurgents. The occasional rogue AI that decides civilization is overrated. Someone who is not bound by conventional thinking or conventional weapons. Someone who can cut through problems both literally and figuratively." I felt my ocular membranes widen in surprise. It was not a bad idea, actually. Insane, but not bad. Kira tilted her head, considering. "What is the pay?" "Negotiable," Quillix said. "Along with full diplomatic immunity, access to council resources, and the freedom to operate as you see fit, within reason." "Define reason. Do not blow up any planets, and try to minimize civilian casualties. Beyond that? He shrugged, a gesture he had clearly learned from humans. Use your judgment. Done, Kira said immediately. When do I start? And that, my friends, was how humanity's most dangerous archaeologist became the Galactic Council's most problematic employee. I should have objected. I should have pointed out the thousands of ways this could go wrong. But instead, I just sat there, watching history pivot on the edge of a quantum blade, and thought, well, this is either the best decision we have ever made, or the last one. Turns out, it was both. But I am getting ahead of myself. That is a story for another time. For now, let me tell you about the first mission. Because if you think cutting through a Vex battlecruiser was impressive, wait until you hear what she did to the Null Syndicate's supposedly impenetrable fortress. It involved the sword, obviously, but also a stolen cargo hauler, a very confused diplomat, and the complete redefinition of what the phrase breaking and entering could mean when physics was more of a suggestion than a law. But I am already at 3,000 words, and my translator unit is overheating from trying to convey the sheer absurdity of it all. So there I was, 6 weeks after Kira Webb had become the Council's official problem solver, sitting in a cramped transport shuttle that smelled like recycled air and bad decisions. Across from me sat Kira herself, casually sharpening her impossible sword with a whetstone that probably was not necessary but made a satisfying scraping sound. Next to her was Ambassador Quillix, who had insisted on coming along despite my repeated warnings that this mission would likely violate 17 safety protocols. Remind me again why we are attacking the Null Syndicate? Quillix asked, his respiratory slits fluttering nervously. We are not attacking, I corrected, checking my tactical display for the 100th time. We are conducting a strategic extraction of intelligence assets. We are breaking into their fortress and stealing their data cores, Kira translated helpfully. Vorthen gets uncomfortable when we use simple language. I clicked my mandibles in irritation. The Null Syndicate has been selling military secrets to the highest bidder for 5 cycles. They operate from a mobile space station called the Iron Recursion. It has shields that can repel capital ship weapons, teleport jammers that prevent boarding, and enough automated defenses to level a small fleet. We have tried diplomatic channels. We have tried economic sanctions. Nothing works. So you called me, Kira said, testing the sword's edge against her thumb. A drop of blood welled up, then immediately sealed as her suit's medical nanites kicked in. Because I have a sword that does not care about shields. Precisely. I love my job. The Iron Recursion loomed ahead, a massive geometric nightmare of intersecting platforms and defensive arrays. It did not orbit anything, just hung in deep space like a metal tumor, constantly shifting position through micro-jumps that made targeting impossible. Hundreds of vessels surrounded it, everything from personal yachts to modified warships. The Null Syndicate did not discriminate in their clientele. Our shuttle, stolen from a cargo company and given false transponder codes, approached along a designated traffic lane. We were supposedly carrying a shipment of Tharn pleasure crystals. In reality, we carried one annoyed analyst, one over-enthusiastic ambassador, and one human with a physics-defying weapon. Approaching Security Checkpoint Alpha, our pilot, a taciturn Vreln named Torque, announced, "They are scanning us." I held my breath. The forged cargo manifest had cost me 3 favors and a bottle of genuine Earth whiskey. If the Syndicate's security AI detected any discrepancies, we would be vaporized before we could even attempt Plan B, which was basically just Kira swinging her sword at things and hoping for the best. Cleared for docking, Torque said, and I felt my spine ridge relax slightly. Bay 17, Section 9. Too easy, Kira muttered. I hate when things are too easy. She was right to be suspicious. We docked without incident, went through a perfunctory inspection where bored syndicate thugs barely glanced at our fake cargo, and were directed toward the station's commercial district. Everything was going smoothly, which meant something was definitely wrong. They know we are here, I said quietly as we walked through the station's main concourse. The place was a riot of species and commerce. Vendors hawking everything from information to illegal bioware. This is a trap. Obviously, Kira agreed cheerfully. Question is, do they know what we can do, or are they just being generally paranoid? We got our answer when we reached the elevator bank that would take us to the data core levels. The doors opened, and standing inside was a figure I recognized from intelligence briefings. Tall, humanoid, but definitely not human, with skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 4 arms, each ending in fingers that were just a bit too long. Eyes that glowed with a soft violet luminescence. Nexar Prime, the Null Syndicate's chief enforcer, and quite possibly the most dangerous assassin in known space. Kira Webb, Nexar said, their voice resonating in a frequency range that made my translator struggle. The Council's pet human. We have been expecting you. Funny, Kira replied, not reaching for her sword yet. I do not remember RSVPing to this party. Your reputation precedes you, a human with an ancient weapon that can cut through anything. How quaint. How, primitive. Nexar's 4 hands moved in a complex gesture, and suddenly they were holding weapons. Not guns. Something worse. Probability disruptors. Devices that could make atoms simply forget how to hold together. Banned technology, obviously, but the Syndicate never cared much for rules. We going to do this here? Kira asked, glancing around at the crowd of civilians. Lot of innocent bystanders. The Syndicate does not concern itself with collateral damage. Yeah, I figured. Just wanted to confirm you were definitely the bad guys before I got started. What happened next occurred in less time than it takes to describe. Nexar fired all 4 disruptors simultaneously. Kira drew her sword, the blade igniting with that familiar quantum shimmer, and deflected the shots with 4 precise movements. The disruption beams scattered into the crowd, and I braced for casualties. But somehow, impossibly, each deflected shot curved through empty space and dissipated harmlessly against the walls. You calculated those angles before you even drew, I breathed, suddenly understanding. You knew exactly where everyone was standing. Archaeologist, remember? Kira said, already moving forward. We are really good at spatial awareness. Comes from years of not destroying priceless artifacts. Nexar's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of emotion I had seen. They fired again. A barrage that should have been impossible to block. Kira's sword became a blur of motion, each strike precise, each deflection controlled. She was not just defending, she was conducting, turning deadly energy into a light show that danced around terrified onlookers. Then she was inside Nexar's guard, and the sword swept up in a rising cut. The enforcer tried to dodge, fast enough to leave after images, but the quantum blade caught them anyway. Not a killing blow, just a precise slice through all 4 weapons and the tendons in Nexar's primary arms. The assassin collapsed, howling in pain, and Kira was already past them, heading for the elevator. Vorthan, Quillix, with me? Torque, get the shuttle ready for a hot extraction. We ran. Behind us, Alarms began shrieking, and I could hear the heavy footfalls of security drones activating. The elevator doors closed just as the first drone rounded the corner, and we began our descent into the station's restricted levels. "That was your plan?" Quillix demanded, his three eyes spinning independently in panic. "Attack their chief enforcer in public?" "That was not the plan," I corrected. "That was improvisation. The plan starts now." The elevator stopped at level 47, deep in the station's core. The doors opened onto a corridor lined with blast doors and energy barriers. At the end, I could see the vault entrance, a massive circular seal covered in shifting holographic locks. "Quantum encryption," I said, consulting my datapad, 27,000-digit key that changes every microsecond. Impossible to crack, impossible to bypass. Kira walked up to the vault door and tapped it with her sword. The blade phased slightly, and she closed her eyes, her face taking on an expression of deep concentration. "Not impossible," she murmured, "just really, really complicated." She began to move the sword in patterns, intricate flowing gestures that reminded me of calligraphy. Each movement left traces in the air, mathematical equations rendered in fading light. She was not cutting the door. She was writing formulas on reality itself, showing the universe a different version of events where the lock had already been opened. It took 3 minutes. 3 minutes of Kira essentially arguing with physics on a quantum level, while alarms screamed and I monitored the security forces converging on our position. 3 minutes of watching her rewrite the fundamental equations of encryption through sheer stubborn determination and a sword that agreed with her interpretation of how things should work. The vault door sighed open. Inside was a chamber filled with data cores, thousands of glowing crystalline structures containing the syndicate's accumulated secrets. Everything from political blackmail to military specifications to financial records that would topple governments. "Grab everything," I ordered, pulling out storage units from my pack. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they breach this level." We worked frantically, downloading data cores into portable drives. So much information, decades of criminal enterprise condensed into handheld devices. Each drive we filled represented leverage, evidence, ammunition for 100 legal battles. "1 minute," Kira warned, her attention on the corridor outside. "They are bringing up heavy weapons, the kind that will punch through these walls and us simultaneously." "Almost done," Quillix panted, his manipulator tendrils flying across the interface panels. "Just 3 more cores, and we have everything critical." Explosions rocked the corridor. They were not bothering with subtlety anymore, just trying to blast their way through. Smart, really. Why negotiate when you could simply collapse the section and pick through the debris later? "Time's up," Kira announced. She grabbed Quillix and me by our respective appendages and pulled us toward the back of the vault. "Plan C." "We do not have a Plan C," I protested. "We do now." She raised her sword and slashed at the vault's rear wall, not the controlled, careful cuts she had been making, but a wild, desperate swing infused with enough quantum uncertainty to make my eyes water. The wall did not just break. It stopped existing in a meaningful way. I could see through it, into the maintenance shaft beyond, but the edges of the cut were doing impossible things, flickering between states of matter like a glitch in reality. We jumped through just as the security forces breached the vault entrance. Plasma fire filled the chamber behind us, superheating the air and melting data cores we had not managed to grab. A waste, but we had what we needed. The maintenance shaft was a vertical tunnel lined with access panels and conduit pipes. Kira slashed upward, cutting handholds in the metal walls, and we climbed desperately toward the upper levels. Below us, I could hear pursuers entering the shaft, their weapons charging. "How far to the docking level?" Kira demanded. 18 levels, I gasped, my limbs burning with exertion. "We will never make it." "Watch me." She planted her feet against the wall and brought the sword down in a vertical slice. Not cutting anything specific, just creating a line of quantum disruption from our position straight up through 18 levels of deck plating, wiring, and structural supports. The station groaned, a deep bass note that I felt in my bones. Then, the entire section we had just cut fell away, tumbling down the shaft like the universe's most dangerous elevator. We clung to the walls as debris roared past. And suddenly we could see daylight, or rather, starlight, filtering through the gap Kira had opened. "Jump!" she yelled. We jumped, leaped out through the improvised exit into open space, our suits automatically sealing and providing limited propulsion. Behind us, the iron recursion was reeling from the structural damage, whole sections depressurizing and emergency bulkheads slamming shut. Torque brought the shuttle screaming in, matching our vectors with precision flying that deserved a medal or possibly therapy. We tumbled through the airlock, and he was already accelerating before the door fully closed. Defensive fire from the station chased us, but Kira positioned herself at the shuttle's rear viewport with her sword ready. Each incoming shot was deflected, sent spinning off into space or back toward the station itself. She turned our stolen cargo hauler into an untouchable ghost, dancing between weapons fire with impossible grace. We cleared the engagement range, jumped to faster-than-light speeds, and suddenly we were safe, hurtling through the void with a cargo hold full of stolen intelligence and a human archaeologist who had just robbed the galaxy's most secure criminal organization. Quillix was laughing again, that drowning sound that somehow expressed pure joy. "We did it! We actually did it!" "We barely survived," I corrected, but I was clicking my mandibles in what might have been my species' version of a smile. That was the most reckless, poorly planned, absurdly successful operation I have ever participated in. "Welcome to working with humans," Kira said, finally sheathing her sword. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from arguing with the universe and winning. "We specialize in making the impossible look easy and giving analysts stress disorders." The data we recovered brought down 47 syndicate operations across 12 sectors. Financial networks collapsed. Criminal enterprises crumbled. Corrupt officials resigned or were arrested. The Council had its greatest intelligence coup in a century, all because one human refused to let physics tell her what was possible. 3 months later, I was called to debrief the High Council on our methods. They wanted to know how we had succeeded where fleets had failed. I tried to explain about quantum manipulation and calculated angles and structural vulnerabilities, but finally I just said, "We gave Kira Webb a sword that could cut through anything and then tried to keep up." High Chancellor Vextor fixed me with his compound gaze. "And you believe this human can continue to operate at this level?" "I believe," I said carefully, "that Kira Webb will continue to rewrite what we think is possible, whether we want her to or not. The question is not whether she can operate at this level. The question is whether we are prepared for what happens when she exceeds it." Turns out, I was more right than I knew. 2 weeks later, Kira discovered that the sword had a second set of equations on the blade's interior edge. Formulas she had not even begun to translate. Whatever they did, it would make cutting through battlecruisers look like a practice exercise. But that truly is a story for another time, assuming we survive long enough to tell it. Webb, the archaeologist who became a legend, who took a museum piece and used it to remind the galaxy that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their numbers. It was their absolute refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder what other artifacts were buried in human archaeological sites, waiting for the right person to dust them off and show the universe what they could do. That thought keeps me awake at night, in the best possible way.